Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Dr. Phil McKenzie, and we are here to discuss all the stuff that happened last weekend, plus, later on in today's episode, a few questions from our patrons/listeners. So, last weekend, the last ever UFC on Fox card. You know what I really liked about this card, Phil?
What was that?
They broke out whole new graphics packages for the last card on the network. Why?
Yep. Just to maybe it was just there was a whole bunch of graphics design people who were tired of all the stale old shit, and they just had no reason to say no at this point. They were like, yeah, let's just try all the crazy stuff you wanted to do, but we didn't let you because we're corporate, because we're a buttoned down corporate monoculture. Just throw all your experimentation out there because no one gives a shit.
You're probably right, except the change they made was to make it much worse and harder to read.
I mean, maybe that was a good reason why they left it off.
There's now some 3D shimmering effect happening, and the camera's constantly moving, so you just can't no, stop. I'm watching it right now. I missed the reach. Okay, it's gone. Great tale of the tape. Really enjoyed that. It was genuinely
a lot of their design innovations have not traditionally been amazing. I mean, we all fondly remember the piss pool octagon.
Oh boy. Dana White's personal choice. The man responsible for Stained being the UFC theme song for this long. Not Stained. It's worse than that, isn't it?
Jesus Christ, Connor, this isn't good enough. STEM. How dare you mix up these two fine musical things.
I think we need, I think STEM really needs a female vocalist, you know? We need more women in STEM. So the card was good. Do you agree?
Yes. Yeah. No. It was good. The undercard had some parts which dragged, but as we discussed before the show, they were parts which were always going to drag.
Yep.
I don't know. We like some bad middleweight fights, but even we looked at Zach Cummings and Trevor Smith and were like, oh yeah, these guys. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to be great. Yeah. And similarly, Zach Otto is not a recipe for fireworks. But no, the rest of pretty much the rest of the card was pretty good. I mean, it was largely action fighters booked to deliver action fights, and that's pretty much what they did.
Yeah, but some really well-matched action fights. There were a couple of mismatches that, I mean, frankly, fights like Jack Hermanson obliterating Gerald Meerschaert was more of a mismatch than I expected it to be ahead of time. Although maybe I should have seen it coming, knowing what the style matchup was. But Silva Gordon, close green. I mean, there were some really well-matched fights that were back and forth. Even the ones that were slow, Cummings Smith was a well-matched fight in which both men pushed each other to the point of just both of them by the third round having absolutely terrible fight IQ. But it was competitive, so a well put together fight.
That was another thing which kind of defined this card, which was people fighting like dumbasses.
Yeah. So, anything in particular you have in mind before we get into the main event?
I mean, spoiler warning, I think we're going to be talking about that in the main event, but also, Hermanson Meerschaert, where it really felt like Meerschaert was treating that like a sparring match.
Yeah.
Where it was like a BJJ role where he just really wanted to see how Jack Hermanson's mount technique worked.
Yep.
So just let's do this again.
Yeah, he was helping Hermanson prepare for an opponent who would recklessly pull guard over and over again.
Yeah, or he was just letting Hermanson do it just so he could kind of figure it out in real time.
Yeah,
he was like, okay, this is the third time. I think I'm getting close to figuring this out. Oh, he's tapped me out. And
also beating the shit out of me every single time I do it. Maybe I should stop doing this. So there were some baffling decisions made in a few of these fights. But let's talk about the main event, where some baffling decisions were maybe made. Iaquinta over Kevin Lee defeated him again. And I feel like with this card, there were two fights in which you and I both should have learned the lessons of the past, of literally last week, when we discussed Jędrzejczyk versus Shevchenko. And I think we saw that fight and we learned, your point about style matchups not changing that much over time may have been vindicated. Or was definitely vindicated in that fight. And maybe I should have kept that in mind in confidently picking Kevin Lee based on his improvements since the first fight he had with Al Iaquinta. And then what we'll get to in a minute, even though this one was left off the main episode, I'd made sure to re-mention your pick on the bonus episode we put out last week. But Rob Font defeating Sergio Pettis, perhaps we also should have kept in mind that it really does matter when a not particularly athletic fighter moves up to face someone in the next weight class up. It really has an effect. Weight does matter. So, okay. But the main event, do you think that rings true? Did this look like the same style matchup as last time, sort of playing out again? But with both men having made improvements. I do think you have to look at this fight and say, like, wow, Al Iaquinta's pretty sharp in these areas. He's gotten better.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely see technical improvements in both men. I think in general, it's hard for me to kind of get away from the narrative, and I fully accept I might just well be doing a disservice to Al Iaquinta here. That Kevin Lee, the main narrative of this fight was Kevin Lee fighting a really weird fight. But yeah, and I suspect it might partially be, Kevin Lee's become increasingly comfortable using his hands and his feet, that he's sort of eventually bought into the idea that he is actually a very good striker. Yeah.
He's having a Josh Koscheck moment right now.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think what we're starting to really see how good Al Iaquinta can be as well. I think because he's had such a strange list of matchups that he's been up against. Mm-hmm. The current UFC lightweight champion, a completely overwhelming physical and technical force, and then he sort of didn't beat Jorge Masvidal, and then a raw Kevin Lee, and everything else has just been pretty much faded veterans and style layups.
Yeah, people he was always going to smash.
Yeah, and then like his weird brain fart fights.
Yeah.
But we've seen, for example, that Al Iaquinta, despite those early submission losses, are perhaps more indicative of someone who is overconfident in their own grappling because they are a very good grappler.
Yes. I think you may be right. That's the thing that jumped out at me as well from this fight. Like, it's also like, I don't know if you mentioned this last week or if it was Zane Simon, doing 2 preview type shows in a week often confuses me, but, Heavy Hands is better. Don't listen to the Vivisection. No, do, please. I think one of you pointed out essentially that for all that I can say that while Kevin Lee had a huge step up when he faced Al Iaquinta, which is true, Iaquinta had faced more experience. Like he'd already fought Ryan Couture, Michael Chiesa, and Piotr Hallman before he faced Kevin Lee. So he did have already his step up. But
in general, I think his amateur career, not amateur career, but his regional career was much more. It was in much better organizations, wasn't it? Like RFA or something.
It was all Ring of Combat, which is a very solid,
Ring of Combat,
very solid East Coast promotion, has been for a long time.
Yeah,
and of course he had the Ultimate Fighter where he fought like Vince Pichel and Andy Ogle and Miles Jury and John Tuck, which is all very respectable competition. But the point was raised that for all of that, Al Iaquinta was also not all that experienced when he fought Kevin Lee the first time. Maybe had not completely figured his style out. So when he lost to Mitch Clark, which is the last like brain fart submission loss of his career, that was a little over 5 years into his career. So like I think it's very possible that that's just the last lesson he needed to learn about how to approach submission artists on the ground, how to rein in his confidence a bit, because it's hard to look at the Khabib fight and then this one and see that. Like his defense against the back mount in this fight was perfect, essentially. He got body triangled really quickly both times, but Lee couldn't get shit done with it. He did a great job of defending with the goal of getting a 2-on-1 in mind. Whenever Lee just tried to get around the defenses and just stalling him out until he could eventually find a way to break the lock and get free.
Yep.
It's like, oh, that's good grappling. He did a great job. Yeah, I think he deserves praise for that. And I want to talk about, like, why did this seem like such a weird performance from Kevin Lee to you? What kind of decisions would you have liked to see him make that he did not make?
I mean, it's difficult to say which ones of these are stylistic and which ones of these are specific points that he made in the moment. So a lot of what we saw is, Kevin Lee trying to fight southpaw and largely kickboxing with Iaquinta and sort of trying to keep the right hand shells with the high kick and then basically jabbing Iaquinta from a distance.
Yep.
And I think the stylistic problem is one that we encounter a lot with wrestlers, in that Kevin Lee's phase shifting appears to be going away as he's becoming a better striker.
Mm-hmm. Whereas Iaquinta's phase shifting, by the way, on point throughout the fight. All of those little fake takedowns he went for and then clipping Lee with a left hook like 10 times over the course of the fight.
Yeah.
Tricky.
I mean, I think a lot of that was that Iaquinta was actually, I mean, he specifically did it a lot in the first round. I think a lot of it was that he just trained hair triggers to drop his level when he saw Kevin Lee approaching. So he was already dropping his level and reaching down, as soon as he saw something coming from Lee. Mm-hmm. But then, he would quickly turn into just, tapping at the leg like he was going to go for the single leg and then coming round with that, either the left hook or something weird like the spinning elbow. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think he trained a lot of hair trigger responses to takedowns. And
in
I think at least in the first round, he was kind of confused by the fact that Lee just didn't go for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a little weird. I mean, obviously, I guess the big one is, I could have said this myself rather than asking you, but Lee only went for, what does fight metric say? 4, 5 takedowns?
Yeah. I mean, he didn't go for one until a couple of minutes into round 2.
Yep. He didn't attempt a single one in round 1. Iaquinta attempted 6, according to fight metric. And yeah, those were all the ones that he turned, many of them into successful clean punches.
Yeah, I don't know if I put Iaquinta as attempting a single takedown. I don't think he actually tried to hit a single takedown on Lee. He feinted a lot of them.
Yeah.
And
he frequently picked up his leg, but the intent was clearly to transition to something else.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm going to lean on the side of stylistic problems as a large part of the explanation for why I think Lee didn't go for takedowns. I mean, I think it is true that he has maybe lost a step in terms of phase shifting, his ability to set up his grappling game with his strikes. Although I don't ever know how much of that he really had.
No. I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, he's either been a sort of physically overwhelming force who's just able to wrestle with people. I'm not sure that he's ever been a guy to really do stuff like just big overhand right or takedown. I mean, it's ugly, but there's a reason why it was the classic wrestler.
Oh yeah, people still do it and make it work.
Yeah,
Khabib does that kind of shit all the time. It works just fine.
I mean, he hit fucking Conor McGregor with it.
Yeah, he gets both the overhand and the takedown to work consistently. Yeah, I'm gonna there were some specific tactical problems here that are kind of, at least for the moment, baked into Kevin Lee's style that I saw giving him a lot of problems. The big one to me was, 2 big ones. Kevin Lee does not feint. He had a big reach advantage over Al, but he does not have the hand speed or the fluidity of a Khabib Nurmagomedov to make that reach alone a problem, especially not as the fight went on. And Iaquinta did a great job of reading and mixing up his responses to those strikes. But Lee did very little feinting. This is when you look at a striker and you're like, they still seem like a novice striker to some reason. They still seem kind of stiff. I think often the reason is that they don't play with the ideas of any of their strikes. They don't suggest or test reactions. It's just like, I've chosen to throw this strike now I'm throwing it. That's what Lee's striking looks like. The other problem, which is sort of baked into that, is that he really struggles to throw combinations. There's little fluidity between his punches, so he really has to work up to throw a combination ahead of time. Iaquinta countered him a lot as a result of that. There were times that Lee had to make himself counter. He would fire like a 1-2 down the pipe, and it would land as a response to whatever Iaquinta was doing. But most of the time, and this has been true since we started seeing real improvements in Lee's striking, honestly. Even the Ferguson fight, we're like, wow, Lee looked really good here in this fight. He had some good moments. It was still mostly single strikes, a lot of them counters, and frankly, a lot of them taking advantage of the fact that against a fighter with long reach, Tony Ferguson is very good at running into the ends of their punches over and over again. Iaquinta managed his distance, though, and didn't overcommit very often, and so, Lee just ended up waiting on him trying to counter with single strikes against an opponent who was feinting, who was changing the targets of his shots on a regular basis, and who was putting combinations together. So, you're just not going to win that kind of fight unless you're a very, very good natural pot shotter, which at least for the time being, Lee clearly is not.
So I agree with both of those, and I'll add another couple of things. He doesn't take his head off the center line at all, really.
No.
Again, another classic example of a long fighter relying on being insulated by his reach.
Mm-hmm.
I would say tall fighter, but that's one of his great physical advantages, that he's actually not all that tall.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing being that he has very, very little to offer going backwards.
Yeah.
Everyone has some kind of shot. So, I mean, if you look at Khabib, for example, Khabib often does, and this is, Khabib is not an optimal MMA striker by any means, but when he's zipping backwards in a straight line, he will at least toss out pouring jabs. He will throw things to kind of obscure his retreat, if not exactly, to damage people on the back foot. So Kevin Lee's sole counterpunch is basically a kind of check hook as he moves backwards, and
the Luke Rockhold special.
Right, and even then, he's far less comfortable throwing it than Rockhold. I mean, even we've seen Rockhold's countering get exploited multiple times, but at least it is a very dangerous option, which has taken a lot of people out. Yeah. Kevin Lee does not have the comfort with that shot that Luke Rockhold does. He doesn't throw it very much.
Rockhold's problems come when he's not thinking past that first counter right hook, or is incapable of doing it, or puts himself out of position throwing it. But he's certainly comfortable trying to time that hook and clip you on the way in. And Lee is still flinching as he's trying to do it, and still second guessing it as he's doing it.
Yeah. So a lot of it, the Serra-Longo corner was just telling Iaquinta, just push him backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And this became increasingly apparent because that it was a great thing to do, because Kevin Lee is not, for whatever other reason, he was finding it an issue to hit counter takedowns. He doesn't have that in his arsenal really either. If you don't have defensive counter punching as a wrestler, you should at least be able to hit a counter takedown, kind of GSP style. But that wasn't there, and partially that's Iaquinta. He is, I think this was underplayed in the Nurmagomedov fight. Iaquinta is actually very good at maintaining without committing to it much, he's able to maintain a sort of mid-range where he's able to hit, connect boxing combinations, but shots from the outside, he can stuff them relatively easily.
Yeah.
I mean, a big part of that, the Khabib fight was, Khabib was able to shoot in and just grab onto a low single with his thumb and forefinger and then convert that into a takedown. And one of the things was like people were like, "Wow, Khabib can convert that kind of connection into a takedown," and that's true. But it was also indicative of the fact that he couldn't get clean shots on Iaquinta.
Yeah.
And that low single went away as the fight went on.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, Iaquinta then just got busted up by the jab because he was so focused on on stopping those connections. But it shows you he is not an easy man to get raw shots on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, part of that comes down to like, you have to be able to treat, there is a weird parallel between striking and, wrestling, at least the shooting shots part of wrestling, where like wrestling and MMA, the biggest difference between it and wrestling on a wrestling mat is that you are allowed to retreat. Like you're not penalized for being too passive or whatever. You can explore the fight in lots of directions. And I think it has a lot more in common with learning to time a back foot counter than it does what most wrestlers are used to when they think of shooting for a takedown. So, I mean, that's the reason why we see guys like Alexander Gustafsson take down great wrestlers, because it's all about timing and distance. And like two things, like, Lee was not proactive enough in making those things happen. You can see him go for counter shots a lot, but he forces them. He doesn't get a reaction and then play off of the reaction. He moves expecting there to be a reaction or hoping for there to be a reaction and shoots whether or not he sees it or not. But likewise, like you said, the distance management of Iaquinta, staying just outside of range and just using really small steps to get into that middle range before separating again, he was not overcommitting. He was not giving Lee a lot of opportunities to connect cleanly on takedowns. And likewise, I have to say this because this is a narrative I would like to spin more and more often. Body punches equal good takedown defense. If you hit somebody below the chest level repeatedly, they are just by virtue of the angle of that shot going to have a very hard time shooting on you. And the more you do it, the more anxious they're going to become about dipping onto one of those shots. So having a good body jab, a good straight right, a good uppercut to the body in your arsenal is genuinely a good form of passive takedown defense. And I think Lee was really anxious about shooting on Iaquinta because he hit the body super consistently throughout the entire fight. And was constantly, at least every 5 shots, he would put a really good one into the body. So yeah, I think it was a really strong performance from Iaquinta in a style matchup that I did not accurately figure was sort of in his favor.
I mean, I still think that there are, for example, I think that from Lee's perspective, there's a couple of things to learn. He said a lot of stuff about, he still basically said that he thinks he won the fight, which is, I mean, I don't think that people who think that Lee won the fight are insane. I think you can find 3 rounds for him if you really want to, but it's one of those fights where he clearly didn't win the fight. Like right. you can give him 3 rounds maybe, but this was a fight where there were 3 razor close rounds and then one guy really clearly won the last 2. This was Shogun Machida type stuff.
Yeah.
Where
you can give Lee the fight, but it is illegal to be upset that Iaquinta got it instead. You are not allowed to be upset. You have to understand.
I mean, but one of the issues is that, Kevin Lee has never lost a close decision before, and he's never really had a close decision before.
Right.
I don't think he's ever, and, young fighters, and well, actually, to be honest, most fighters, it's a very rare thing for someone to be actually able to really clearly tell how well they're doing in a fight. Yeah. And I don't think he had much, he just didn't have the kind of I don't think he had the read on how the fight was going. If he really thought that that first round was just a slam dunk for him. Other than that, I mean, we've seen grapplers make their striking a threat, GSP, Khabib, and so on. But it did seem that he came out with the idea that his striking had to be the threat, and his, that he could go straight to level 2. He could kind of go. He would just beat Iaquinta on the feet straight up. He wouldn't even have to make him scared of the takedowns first.
He's like, I did what Khabib did to Edson. I should do what Khabib did to Iaquinta too.
Yeah. I did kind of feel like he thought, I'm gonna I'm going to outdo Khabib every time I fight someone that he's already fought.
I'm going to be like Pacquiao and Mayweather. I'm going to be Pacquiao who beats all the guys Floyd beats just slightly more impressively after he's beaten them.
Yeah. I mean, because his first takedown, it wasn't dissimilar to Khabib's, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was he kind of, Iaquinta was already getting out of the way of the shot, and then Lee managed to convert a low single into pushing Iaquinta into the fence, into just hulking him down. And all that is almost exactly how Khabib did it. But the thing is that Khabib gets his takedowns early, and it means that the other guy is, by that point, the other guy has already felt what a dry, fresh, freakishly powerful Khabib at his height of comfort and sort of, offensive capability feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And that is immediately implanted in them for the rest of the fight.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, holy shit, that guy was monstrously physically powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, Lee spaced out his takedowns so much that I just think he was tiring himself just through the sheer, his just due to the fact he's not a comfortable striker, and that he was kind of getting beaten up a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's like a very well-conditioned athlete. Like typically when he's fighting his fight, he can push a pretty insane pace and keep it going. But yeah, striking is stressful as fuck when you're not used to it. It's really, really stressful. And being in a situation where you don't feel comfortable means you're flinching and tensing up. And yeah, you just, you lose sight of what's actually happening in the fight. And B, you get tired. I agree. I think he lost his energy. It would have been a better investment of energy probably to go for 6 hard takedown attempts in the first round and put that in Iaquinta's head. Give him something to think about for the rest of the fight. I agree.
I mean, like I said, he's like Khabib. He's so powerful. He can do what Khabib did. He can convert tiny connections into dominant positions.
Yeah.
And he should be capitalizing on that. And also, I know Kevin Lee isn't doing this, but please just body jab people, man. Just body jab.
Just try.
It looks like a takedown. And it's also awesome. And your feet, your arms are 7 feet long.
What? Just body jab, buddy.
Okay, that's probably enough for me for my.
Yeah. I think that
I can't ever do these things.
It was, I mean, I don't know. It's a good fight to discuss. I think we got some good conversation out of it because it was one that I think we both more or less, confidently expected Kevin Lee to win this time around, and he didn't. So it's a really interesting point in his career and a chance to reevaluate, how good Al Iaquinta is. And what kinds of opponents he may, in the top 10, he may have a really good shot of beating. And the fact that, I have to say again, Al Iaquinta has also clearly gotten better over time. Less active than Kevin Lee, but he has sharpened up his skills and gotten more comfortable. He looked supremely confident throughout this fight, never to a fault. He looked at home in these striking exchanges in a way that Lee never did. So,
you know who he's increasingly going to be my, who's going to increasingly be my comparison for him?
Who's that?
Your boy, Rafael Assunção.
Ooh. A, how dare you? But B, I kind of get it. So
yeah,
yeah, I like that. I could use more Hafas in the world, so I'm not upset either. All right, when we come back, a couple other fights in this card to discuss, especially the co-main event, Edson Barboza versus Dan Hooker. Y'all made Edson Barboza an underdog, and now you regret it. And a couple others as well after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are still talking about UFC on Fox 31. I really would like to get this in my head that I want to start calling UFC events by the names of the fighters in the main event. Fuck the UFC and their shitty branding. I want to call this UFC Lee versus Iaquinta 2. All right, so that's the card that we're talking about. Edson Barboza and Dan Hooker had a fight in the co-main event. It was mostly a fight. It was, one of those that sort of very quickly starts towing the line from fight to performance, as Edson Barboza more or less carved Dan Hooker up from the very start, ate some shots, experienced some pressure, but there was no question who was doing the more damage in this matchup or who had the advantage right from the outset. I said ahead of time I thought this was like a JDS Tuivasa where we were all worried about Edson's momentum, his career momentum and everything, and overlooked the fact that Dan Hooker is actually a fantastically easy style matchup for him, and I think it kind of played out that way. Dan Hooker, slow, likes to fight from distance, has been carved up by a quick, silly kicker before. So it kind of looked like that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another one of these sort of puzzling IQ performances in that that there's been a clearly established way to fight Edson Barboza, and Dan Hooker did not take it. I mean, apart from and this is notable, like in the second round, once his leg had been turned into mincemeat, he was just like, I mean, this was an incredible display of heart by Dan Hooker.
Oh yes,
I mean,
and an incredible display of negligence by his corner, we should say.
Yeah, it was one of those performances which became increasingly hard to watch.
Yeah,
like it is when you kind of go, "This is awesome. This is good."
Yeah, word is he's now in the hospital with a concussion and somehow no broken ribs. Yeah,
I mean that's what I thought at the end,
right?
When he just kept crushing into the body again and again, and then he just went into a fetal position. Yeah. I was like, yeah, he's broken something there.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, in the second round, he just decided to bum rush Edson Barboza because he had no choice. He could not possibly stand with him at range anymore.
Yep.
And he had to use what was left in his leg to get to him, and it kind of worked. Like,
oh yeah.
This is the thing. I mean, with Barboza, it's such a strange dynamic with him because he can pivot and turn and he can box, but there's such a mental tick about him needing space. I mean, we even saw like how much Barboza has improved in clinch situations. We saw him, he's not only just breaking away and stiff arming and escaping and moving back into space, but he's offensive in the clinch as well. He's dirty boxing in there. He's throwing knees. He is like, you look at his game in the individual pieces and you're like, I don't know why your game breaks down the way it does, other than that you have just a pathological need to get back to a certain distance.
Yeah, I think he is still in a lot of ways like a rote fighter. He has like a specific way he's been trained to fight, and without thinking about it, when you put the pressure on, he's just like, make distance, make distance, make distance. Like there may be a point not too far off, depending on how much longer Edson Barboza keeps fighting, where we see a performance of him where he gets pressured and suddenly the latest wrinkle he has learned by rote is knowing how and when to close the distance on your own terms. Like that's all he would need, is just to be able to plant his feet when running away starts to feel like it's no longer going to work, and just either stand your ground or move into the guy chasing you, spin off and get back to open space. But he doesn't have that. He just, I mean, it's probably because his most comfortable skill set is still his kicking game. And he feels that when he's like, he doesn't like being in punching exchange distance any longer than he has to be. So it's quick flurried combos and then pathological need, as you said, to get back to kicking range after that.
Yeah, I mean, we saw, like I said, a lot more of him being able to do this in close. I mean, Hooker moved in on him at the end of the second, but even then, it cost him an awful lot.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and this is one of the fundamental problems with the style matchup for Hooker, but that Hooker is looking for the timing, and he's looking for timing to like pick up a single shot, and his single shots tend to be, you know, a single uppercut, a single hook. He's looking for this. He's looking to get the read on his opponent, right?
Yeah.
And you can read people who have a single attack. If it's just speed at a single attack, you can read that. You can, you know, you and Pat have talked about reading the fastball a lot.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can pick up a counter on that. But when you add diversity into the mix, that becomes a lot harder, because Edson Barboza is not only incredibly quick, but he's very, very diverse.
Yeah.
He throws a lot of, you know, he throws a jab, he throws a hook, he goes to the body, and he's, you know, are you really comfortable that you're going to be able to like get the timing on his kicks and how to counter them and when to close in on him before he's just fucked you up? Because the answer is no.
By design, his offense is super diverse, and like, I think I want to underscore what you said about timing things that are fast, because it's absolutely possible. You're all MMA fans, so you have probably heard a bajillion idiots with some misspelling of Conor McGregor as their Twitter handle say the phrase, timing beats speed, precision beats power. But it is true. A clean shot is better than a hard shot unless the hard shot lands clean. And timing is better than speed unless the fast guy has fantastic timing. You can time quickness because a lot of timing is based on expectation. It's not based on, like, just like the fastball, you are seeing the very beginning of the movement, and once you get used to the speed at which it's moving, you then sort of project that understanding into where it will be in the next half second or whatever. So you develop over the course of a fight or over the course of 3 pitches or whatever the sport, you develop your ability to time something based on your having seen it before and expecting where it's going to be. And so obviously having a diverse attack or being able to change rhythm really fucks up somebody's ability to time you with counters, because they're not really seeing the shots that you're throwing per se. They are seeing what they expect to happen. And there were a lot of occasions in this fight where, Hooker was, you know, like, that's the thing. He was trying to time what Barboza was doing, but he just could not. There was too much variety coming at him. I also think, did I cut you off saying something else?
Nope.
Okay. I also think that, there is a fundamental stylistic problem in just how Dan Hooker uses his pressure striking. He has had some good performances lately at lightweight where, he's been pressuring people. I would say, a lot of fighters probably have like their main pressuring tool though, you know, like for some fighters, it's their defense. You know, you throw to get them off of you and they slip and suddenly they're inside throwing punches. Some fighters, it's their footwork. They're exceptionally good at cutting off the cage or at creating false openings and then cutting you off as you go to try to escape. For Hooker, I would say the defining element of his pressure game is his reach. He sort of just stalks forward very slowly, very methodically, and keeps you on the end of his punches. And so you are trying to bridge a bigger gap than him. And a lot of the spectacular knockouts we've seen from him at lightweight have been, him just understanding as the opponent tries to cover that distance where their head is going to be at a certain time, because he's comfortable playing with that space. And the problem with that here is that not relying on footwork or quickness, being relatively rooted and sort of shuffling and stalking around, expecting your reach to the job is kind of exactly the sort of pressure that I would expect a leg kicker to have a field day with. And I think that was a big problem. Like Hooker just doesn't have this mobile in and out feinting kind of pressure style. He wants to plant his feet, feel how far away you are, and catch you coming in. And so what happens if you just stay farther away, move 3 times faster than him every time you strike, and focus a lot of those strikes on his planted legs? He just gets fucked up.
Yeah. So you mentioned Tuivasa JDS, but in terms of the whole is JDS done? Oh no, he's not. He's still amazing. Hype cycle kind of thing that, you know, the whole hype cycle sine wave that follows JDS throughout his predictable style matchups.
Yeah,
I think there's an analog here, and that's JDS Rothwell. In that's actually what Hooker's style increasingly reminds me of. That kind of, slightly Foreman-esque aggressive counterpunching style, where he's got the hands slightly. He wants to sort of paw and feel where the shot is before he can come back with something.
Sort of push you around, mess with your guard, just constant hand traffic in your face.
And in both those cases, they were just up against a guy who was just like, this guy's giving me the mid-range?
Right, exactly.
No one gives me the mid-range. Oh, this is amazing.
He's just trying to reach into middle distance. He's right
incredible.
there.
Yeah,
and in a similar vein, Ben Rothwell was much slower than JDS in that fight. So he was just, JDS had a fucking field day being given that range in which he was at least twice as quick as his opponent. It looked a lot like that.
And just a very, and again, he's too diverse to counter when he's on his, because, he feints, he jabs to the body, jabs high. He got to play with all of his tricks. And the same was true of Barboza. He got to try every one of his tricks, and pretty much all of them works, apart from maybe that he didn't land a clean wheel kick on Hooker.
Yeah, but he made up for it with the back kicks to the body, which were horrific.
Yeah, everything this was not nice to watch by the end. I mean, I love me some Edson Barboza violence, but this got and I'm I've always loved Barboza's body work with his boxing, and that was also wonderful in the fight. I just did a fantastic job of ripping the body in general. Dan Hooker is an absolute freakishly tough monster of a man, but it was good that we got to see, this is how good Barboza can look. This is how dangerous he really is.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I think those style matchups will still be out there. But honestly, how many other Khabibs and Fergusons are there in this division? As I said, you can't just beat Barboza with pressure, because I mean, a big weapon of his, this was how he started to come back in the Michael Johnson fight. He had some success in the first round and then started to tire, but then Michael Johnson started to tire, and suddenly Barboza was kind of back in the fight by the end. And the thing is, he's exceptionally well conditioned. He recovers really quickly, and he does have a very methodical, systematic process of striking to rely on. So we even saw moments in the Khabib and Lee fights from him where he was clearly not in the fight, but he's still capable of keeping his combinations going. He doesn't have to think about those things so much anymore, if at all. So I mean, in terms of who else in the division is tough. I mean, there's an obvious matchup which a lot of people have said they would like to see, which I think would be horrible for him, and it is Gaethje. Gaethje, yeah, which was the first fight that Gaethje asked for when he came to the UFC, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still think that would be real tough for Barboza.
Yeah, because despite what we saw here, I think a lot of this had to do with the speed difference. Barboza is not going to be doing that much damage to Gaethje, I don't think. He's not normally that powerful puncher.
He's a lot faster than Gaethje, but it's just the fact that Gaethje will be just constantly, all Gaethje would be doing is trying to sweep Barboza into a corner, with strikes and with kicks. He's not going to be testing him out of mid-range. He's just going to be constantly trying to push him back into the fence, and it's very hard to see Barboza not starting to do his whole galloping backwards and sideways thing.
In a matchup where every single attempt to kick is a dire risk, where this guy might just drop a right-hand bomb on your chin every single time because, holy shit, he's really close and don't I have to get away? Yeah, that kind of pressure. So I don't care to see that. Honestly, Iaquinta versus Barboza?
Yeah, I kind of think Barboza would fuck him up, but yeah.
Yeah. That slow-footedness, the lesser reach, maybe. Yeah, you might be right.
Yeah, but I mean, who knows? I've obviously underestimated Iaquinta before, but yeah,
Truth.
I think it would be tough for him.
So have I. But okay. So let's quickly run through a couple others on this before we get to some questions. Rob Font, Sergio Pettis. Phil,
yeah, I picked Pettis in this fight, and that was dumb.
I saw your reasonings for picking Pettis, but I think, unfortunately, again, this is the reason I picked Font. I think I did learn a lesson from Shevchenko Jędrzejczyk, one that I will forget by next episode, doubtlessly. But I did kind of. It sucks sometimes when you make a pick like this. It's like picking based on, oh, he's just a better athlete. And it's like, oh, I wanted to analyze this fight. But realistically, I was like, well, Pettis can have a lot of the same kind of success that Asuncao did, finding the little openings in Font's technique and getting a read on him as the fight goes on. But Font's just going to hit a lot harder and be a lot stronger when they tie up. And that's kind of what it looked like to me. Like, Pettis just did not have the sting on his shots. Rob Font didn't give a fuck about being hit by Sergio Pettis. And
yep.
Rob Font, we have seen him buckle under bullying kind of pressure before. If he just doesn't give a shit about whatever you're throwing at him, Asuncao's shots were hurting him and stunning him and surprising him. And Sergio's like, after a time, he was like, I'm just going to punch through this, and it's fine.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a couple of dynamics at play, much like Joanna. I think Pettis has perhaps we've underplayed how, or at least I've underplayed how much he needs a reach advantage, or at least parity. That was clearly like he wasn't happy working his way into the pocket past a reach advantage at all. And I found myself thinking, how many times has he actually had to do this? Mm-hmm. Like, maybe he did against Brandon Moreno, but Brandon Moreno is a profoundly unskilled, I mean, not unskilled, but a profoundly unstructured striker still. Also, you know, I was impressed by, I thought Font did a really great job of, I think he fought at a higher pace than we've seen before from him.
Mm-hmm. With good, good, just stay busy kinds of volume too. Just like staying behind the jab, staying busy without really having to think too much about what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, he established the jab right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we've seen sometimes we've seen from Font that he can be a bit too focused on just working for the finish rather than working to win. Mm-hmm. And so, whilst this wasn't perhaps the action fight that the brass might have hoped for when they booked it. It was still like encouraging to see from a technical perspective from Font, in that he was just like, I'm just gonna, and he did a great job of you know, we mentioned it with Lee. He feinted his jab a lot as well. He was constantly giving Pettis something to think about when Pettis wanted to close distance, and because he knew, you know, because he knew that Pettis was almost entirely going to come back with the right hand, he was always kind of, when the right hand came through, most of the time, Font already had something up. He was moving back away from it. He was taking some of the sting off it. He wasn't getting put in those Asuncao situations where he was the one coming forward into Asuncao and getting rocked and then sort of losing 2 minutes worth of work, and then panic and then sort of starting to panic.
Yeah, I would have liked to see something that Sergio maybe could have picked up from the Asuncao fight was Asuncao consistently countering Font's jab with leg kicks and like same time right hands. Like, I think a big part of that performance and why Asuncao looked so dominant, like pretty much right from the start, despite the numbers being relatively close, is that he was taking Font's weapons away from him, which is pretty effective against a guy who, like, in this fight, he was so busy because he threw mostly jabs throughout the contest. Pettis did not have a way to take that away from him. So, I mean, the power affected that as well, but just like every time pulling away and coming back with the right hand when you're at a reach disadvantage and you're the slower fighter, is maybe not that great.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I agree though. I really liked Font's work with the jab. I really like seeing him do all these just really basic boxer's tricks, pump feint your way into range, then throw the jab, you know, pump feint to the head, then throw it to the body. Feint, just throw the right hand as a lead without having to actually extend the jab at all. Lots of little rhythm changes and different variations on the very basic concept of a 1-2. He was really effective and looked really clean. And when the opportunity arose, he did use his size advantage to just kind of outmuscle Sergio in wrestling exchanges as well, which it was a strong performance, one that perhaps he should have been more favored to win. But again, I saw where you were coming from with that. Anything else? Bobby Green got robbed. Just kidding. I haven't watched that one rescoring it yet. It was close and competitive, but I thought Green won the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Joaquim Silva, Neto BJJ, or as I call him, Vitor Belfort 2.0. Do you remember a point in time when Vitor used to knock people dead and then run around screaming jiu-jitsu?
Yep.
Yeah. So the new version
The new
of
Neto
that,
BJJ.
who exclusively trashes people with power punches and very rarely even sticks around on the ground long enough to try a submission. That's a really brutal fight. One in which Neto basically hit upon the idea of attacking the body as Gordon was starting to slow after having his knee fucked up by yet another back cradle knee bar, or whatever we're going to call that, a Suluev stretch.
Yeah, it is the year of the Suluev stretch.
Yeah, that would have been the third one this year. And honestly, like with a little more time in the round, he probably would have finished it because he clearly messed up Gordon's knee. But I also liked his Lineker approach to fight IQ and problem solving, which was he was like, well, I'm getting hit every time. Maybe I should throw more punches. So he did. And he was like, the body shots are working. And then so he didn't stop throwing them. And it was very effective. Just pouring on targeted offense no matter what's coming back at you. It won him the fight. So a pretty clever adjustment in a pretty brutish sort of way from Joaquim Silva. I guess we should also shout out Jack Hermanson, who is awesome. And I love the fact that he has made brutal ground and pound his brand, his trademark as a fighter.
Yeah, I mean, he reminds me, he's a little of the sort of Neil Magny of the division in that he's perhaps not as good on the feet as he might be, but like if you get underneath him, he's just really going to fuck you up. But like even more to an even more extreme, on an even more extreme level. But yeah, so
yeah, I think that's
Gerald
a really
Meerschaert,
strong comparison.
Yeah, Gerald Meerschaert, clearly just, I don't know, I just got the feeling like he was just calmly accepting the grappling exchanges because Hermanson, is the first guy that Hermanson wasn't really able to really get hard shots on from back mount. And I do like Hermanson's back mount a lot. Mm-hmm. I like the way he sort of walks a pretty thin line between getting too high on the back and just, whenever the guy sort of moves whenever the guy tries to like shift their hips up to flip him over the top, he just grabs their shoulders and then just yanks, just basically, uses their shoulders as the lever to just flatten them out again and crush, and then punches them to death.
The action of trying to buck him off gives him a little slight opportunity to just stick the boots in even further and break you down again.
Yep. So yeah, I like watching him a lot. Yeah, so it was puzzling watching Gerald Meerschaert like just sort of calmly get into that position and get fucked up again like 4 straight times in a row until Hermanson was just like, yeah, why don't I try something different? Submitted him.
Love that guillotine, by the way. The full arm in, like Schultz headlock style guillotine, the kind that, what are some examples? Pat Curran got whatever that Russian guy he once fought was with it.
Oh, yeah. That wasn't,
he was like
that
briefly,
wasn't Frodo, that was someone else.
No, it wasn't Kazbalayev. It was someone who was like briefly a terror who like knocked out Mike Richmond.
Yeah.
And then Pat Curran.
Shabulayev.
Yes. And also Pedro Munoz got one not too long ago on someone. Transition from the back to that guillotine, very much the way Hermanson did for this one. A beautiful transition. Love that, just sort of dropping off to the side and suddenly you're being choked. So yeah, Jack Hermanson, I mean, do you agree that he'll probably struggle against the real athletic prime of this division no matter how good he gets?
Yep.
Like,
I mean, we saw him against Cesar Ferreira and Thiago Santos, and yeah, unfortunately, those did not look like matches that he could be physically competitive with at all. And we've also seen Cesar Ferreira recently get sort of out-athleted. So yeah, it'll be a tough one for him, but he'll always be awesome to watch. He's got tons of heart and a really interesting, unique game, and yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, that's UFC on Fox, Lee versus Iaquinta 2. It was a pretty damn solid card. If you didn't check out all the fights we mentioned, go back and give them a review with our comments in mind. After this next break, we are going to get to as many questions as we can from some of our patrons. Questions about strategy, technique, and the MMA game as it is today. After this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Voice sounds alright. It sounds pretty clear.
Okay.
Alright, non-issue. That's what they say at an Indian place when they've sold a lot of bread.
Sorry?
It's a non-issue.
Oh, you make me sick.
I don't fucking know. All right, let's get started. Well, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are dipping into the heavy bag, and there used to be a sound effect for this, so ding ding. There it is. Our first question comes
what happened to the sound effect?
What do you mean? Has the file been corrupted? Do you think that not sound as good as it used to?
Yeah.
Oh.
Something's wrong there.
Damn.
I don't remember it sounding quite like that.
Well, Reddit user u/oxygen-addiction, please make us a new one, because this one sounds like shit now. We need a new one. All right. First question comes to us from Nick McFarlane, and a thank you ahead of time to all of these people. Of course, these are people who have contributed $5 a month to the Heavy Hands Patreon in exchange for a question being asked. And we have been putting out some good bonus content lately, so you may want to go over there and check it out. It's just $3 a month for the bonus episodes, $5 to get your questions guaranteed on the show. But let's see. Our first question comes to us from Nick McFarlane. Nick asks, on your 6 Classic Fights episode, that was the one of the last 2 that Pat Wyman did with us, you mentioned Fedor's performance against Krokop as the quintessential anti-kicker performance. So I was wondering, what would you consider your quintessential anti-performances against each of your 5 style archetypes? So those who may be newer listeners to the show may not know that the good doctor Patrick and I used to have our understanding of what the 5 basic styles were in fighting based on your temperament and essentially how you were comfortable and how you felt that you were effectively putting some kind of pressure on the opponent. So those are your pressure fighters, your swarmers, people who are genuinely just putting pressure on you by pushing the pace and staying in your face. Counter punchers, much more patient and waiting for their opportunities a little more. Outfighters, pot-shotting from long range. Brawlers, maniacs, and finally the rare all-terrain fighters who seem to be able to do it all. Boxer puncher. That's one too. Maybe boxer puncher and all-terrain fighter are similar though. But so what are the good anti-performances against those? I think we came up with a pretty easy one for some of them, but who have you seen effectively dismantle a pressure fighter, Phil?
I think when I think of the classic kind of anti-pressure performances, I think of Eddie Alvarez against both RDA and Michael Chandler in their second fight. I think primarily what kind of made those fights work is Alvarez's ability to be active and dangerous in every phase of the fight. Mm-hmm. Meaning there was never, both RDA and Chandler were and are fighters who have, when they reach the areas which they're comfortable in, they're incredibly overwhelming, and they will basically sit there forever. RDA specifically. And for RDA, it's the fence. If he can push you to the cage, then he's just happy to just sling the left hand, sling the 1-2, leg kick, body kick, clinch, takedown, and so on. His whole game works very well from that point. And Eddie Alvarez is one of the very few fighters who is able to kind of take the fence away from his opponent in that kind of way, and that he's able to it's not necessarily an area where his game falls apart like a lot of other fighters do. Like, a lot of people said that, Conor would have beaten RDA, if you look at how Eddie beat RDA, and then, you look at what Conor did to Eddie. And I'm always unsure about whether that's true, because Eddie is someone who's great at fighting off the cage, and Conor is someone who is sort of terrible at fighting off the cage.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, so he's just able to kind of, in both cases, he was able to circle, feint, mix up which direction he went in, and eventually to counter coming off the cage, which was what led to him taking RDA out. So
yeah,
those two are the big ones for me.
Yeah, I think those are great examples. I mean, you could also add Gaethje, of course, falls into the brawler category at least a bit, but Alvarez versus Gaethje too. Having the perfect responses to an aggressive opponent, specifically in that fight, the savage counter body punching. But he has a.
I feel like that's also like one of the quintessential anti brawler fights for me. That and Poirier, because Gaethje is really the classic high level brawler. Yeah.
Well, why don't we jump into that then? While we're thinking of some examples, another one that came to mind for me earlier was T.J. Dillashaw's win over John Lineker, where he just didn't give him the chance to brawl. It was a lot of like feeding Lineker, deliberately making him chase, feeding him lots of information so that he had to start processing things, which he doesn't want to do, right? He wants to get in your face and start doing work. He doesn't want to have to think and plan and react. And then mixing up your timing his aggression and mixing up the offense well enough that he has to start calculating more and more and more as the fight continues. The minute that TJ was able to start feinting and getting super clean shots on Lineker's legs, that Lineker was not going to win that fight, barring a big shot that knocked Dillashaw out. So, a pretty damn impressive performance.
And just, in the whole, it was also just making sure every slice of range was very, every part of the distance that Lineker had to cover was hard for him, and he was just coming through the outer range. He was just getting kicked a lot, and then the middle range he was getting taken down a lot, and so it was costing him so much that you actually saw him become, for one of the first times in his career, you actually saw him becoming tentative.
Yes, yeah, exactly. He actually put the fear in John Lineker. So, let's see, next one. Let's talk about counterpunchers. I did have a good example for this one, I think. One that was also discussed on our Great Fights episode. But of course, Rory McDonald's dismantling of Tyron Woodley is one of the best anti-counterpuncher performances I think we've ever seen in MMA.
I can't say much better than that. One of my favorite fights, and it's just diversity, understanding of the range, understanding of how to make, one strike look like another. It's great.
Oh, and since we did already mention him, and we're just kind of cycling through similar fighters, but another great performance, we celebrated Eddie Alvarez's counterpunching. Poirier, specifically in the second fight against Eddie Alvarez, also did a fantastic job of denying him the chance to get many clean counters off. Yeah. Okay. And let's see. Who has taken apart a boxer puncher? One of the harder categories to actually clearly define. Who are our MMA boxer punchers?
I think Robbie Lawler is the classic.
Robbie Lawler. Jose Aldo, maybe?
Yep. I think Jose Aldo comes closer to being the all-round fighter than perhaps Robbie does. But yeah, he's not actually a bad shot either. I think specifically from the kind of punching angle, I think there's a lot like the RDA Lawler is a great example of how to dismantle a big and also like subtle puncher. Like it's one thing to be Rory, who just diffused Tyron Woodley, but RDA specifically was just able to kind of hack away at Lawler's lead leg and then kind of push him back and push him into grappling and clinch exchanges that he just wasn't dictating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great shout. All right, so thank you for the question, Nick. I'm
sure we've missed some. We've missed
Counterpuncher,
Outfighter.
Outsider. Oh yes, who has ripped someone's legs out from under them? Essentially, the kind of thing we're looking for. I don't know. Who are our good outfighters?
Do you know what I have as like a weird, like, cunning anti-outfighter performance that I'm gonna shout out to because it never gets any is Wanderlei Silva against Michael Bisping.
Oh,
I always find this to be like one of Wanderlei's most cunning, like, performances.
Mm-hmm.
In that it was a matchup that Bisping was really heavily favored to win, I think, and he's always maintained that he won it, and he obviously kind of didn't, but because it's one where Silva was able to steal almost every single round with a huge burst of offense right at the end of it. And it was less in the terms of, like, pushing an outfighter back or making him contest. I mean, in some ways it was making him contest on a shot-to-shot basis, which is what an outfighter doesn't want to do. But it was also just like one of the ideas of the outfighter is the steady stream of offense. And Michael Bisping's always characterized that. And it was a great example of Silva, like, sort of losing most of the round to just Bisping just circling and jabbing and circling and jabbing and 1-2 and circling and jabbing, and then just coming back with one huge shot when he was sure it was going to work to just game Bisping's whole style.
Yeah. I think you could probably also say Hendo Bisping. Along the same lines, or perhaps not quite as concise an example because he did clearly lose some rounds in the process, but Romero's most recent fight with Robert Whittaker. Whittaker forced to play very much an outfighter's game, and just got rounds taken from him in single instance by a fighter who was just ready to do just that. Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, so thank you for the question, Nick. Let's get a couple more in if we can. Next one comes to us from Chris Partlow, who is a murderer.
From Baltimore County Jail, we can only assume.
Yeah, so very good to hear from you, Chris.
Serving multiple consecutive life sentences. Actually, wait a minute. We can't spoil this.
I was already going to. Look, the show ended in 2005, all right? I was going to be like, how's Snoop doing? And then I remembered that she's dead. In the universe of Chris Partlow's show. Anyway, Chris Partlow, a.k.a. Knockout Ned on Twitter, friend of the show, Knockout Ned. He has a question about leg kicks. I'm going to basically read it all here. I'm looking for, like, a general theory of leg kicks in modern MMA. If they're so effective as an attritive technique, why do fighters throw them less now than, say, 10 years ago? The answer I always hear is, well, the kickee can punch you at the same time you throw the kick. If that's true, why don't we see more of that in Muay Thai or straight kickboxing? What exactly are fighters like Ricardo Lamas and Ponzinibbio doing that make their leg/calf kicks so effective, but other fighters aren't doing it? Other just addendums. Why did Jose Aldo completely stop throwing leg kicks? Is the risk of injuring your foot or shin a big factor? Isn't a Dutch-style combo literally the most effective way to throw in MMA? Why on earth doesn't anyone leg kick Stephen Thompson? All right, so there's his rambling question. Leg kicks in modern MMA. Clearly, we have seen some notable examples very recently of them being extremely effective. They're still a very valuable and worthwhile technique. But it does feel like they sort of had a moment a few years ago where, like, Joe Rogan was determining the direction of fight discussion in the country, or in the MMA world. And now it's like, I don't know. People aren't quite as obsessed with low kicks as they used to be, perhaps. Why do you think they may have a limited effectiveness?
I think it's because the level of striking in MMA is still pretty low in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. There's still a lot of growth to come in the sport, and they are a high risk technique.
Yeah.
So if we think about how people throw leg kicks, and it is traditionally in MMA, it is traditionally raw. Not dressed up. The people just kick.
Yep, naked kicks.
And yeah, and so like Ned said, the best way to throw them is in combinations. It's to hide them behind punches and to make sure the other guy is braced on his lead leg, either because he's he's defending a shot or he's literally been pushed by that shot, like the classic Dutch style combination.
Left hook, right low kick.
Yep. And combination striking in MMA sucks. Still.
It's true.
And so when we see leg kicks, they are traditionally, they're still raw a lot of the time. But we don't see fights like Hendricks Lawler, for example, where people are contesting in close range with combinations into leg kicks. That's one of the classic, perhaps the classic infighting performance in this sport, where we see what leg kicks kind of could look like and aren't. So in the end, they're just too high risk for a lot of people, and they tend to be very specifically useful against a style of opponent. They tend to be useful against people who have a boxing centric approach and people who lean heavily on the front leg. Your Diaz's, your Lawlers, and such like, because those guys, it's easier to kick them. To land a raw leg kick on them because their weight for throwing the shot is gone. If they, even if they're braced for it, they can't counter it terribly effectively.
Yeah, and even with those guys, like the boxing focused fighters rely on their jabs a lot. One of the rare occasions where it is like consistently a good idea to counter with kicks is often to counter a jab with a right low kick. As the weight comes forward into the strike. So, like, I'm also thinking of a recent one, Calvin Kattar, losing to Renato Moicano. Just got his leg chewed up every time he stepped into jab, and he needs his jab for his style to work. So it was particularly effective. I do want to address part of this. If that's true, if the punching at the same time is the problem, which I agree with you, it is. It's a low-risk technique that takes, it takes multi-layer timing as well. Like Marlon Moraes does a great job setting up his low kicks, but you watch him do it and you understand how difficult it can be, because you often have to take several adjustment steps. You have to time, especially if you're counter kicking like he often does, you have to time in advance a single precise movement against several small movements of your own to get yourself into a defensively sound counter kicking position. So it takes some speed and some timing and lots of experience to be that fluid. But Ned asks, why don't we see more of that in Muay Thai or straight kickboxing? And I would say that we do see a lot of it. In fact, if you watch Muay Thai, there are not a lot of guys who throw a lot of low kicks. They're sort of disincentivized by the scoring. Low kicks are seen as, erroneously, I think, at least this is what I've heard, and I would disagree with it, but they are often seen as the easiest kind of strike to land, or at the very least like a sort of a low thought technique. It doesn't take much to come up with a leg kick. If you can't think of anything else, you just kick the guy in his thigh. But to add to that, everyone is really comfortable checking, and you have to be relatively close to throw a leg kick, and people do counter, or they will throw back straight down the pipe or nail you with an uppercut or something like that as you come in to dig into their thigh. So, we don't see a ton of really dedicated low kickers in Muay Thai. There are guys like Porn Sanai, but for the most part, people go for their body kicks and their head kicks because you can throw the body kicks from farther away, and you can force the other guy to block rather than countering if you're attacking his head. Whereas the leg kicks, if he wants to just bend his knees and sit down on a counter, he can. So, yeah, it's always risky. It's always a risky technique. It takes a fairly specialized kind of game sometimes to make it work. As for why people don't kick Stephen Thompson in the legs, I don't know.
I mean, it's also just that, I think there's a lot of, as we've said, the MMA striking still has a fair amount of way to go. And we think of it as kind of like it's a probability space, and expanding into different areas takes various amounts of effort and has various costs. I think things like leg kicks, also, as we've seen with guys like Edson Barbosa, they're difficult to throw moving backwards. They're difficult to throw off any kind of movement. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the kind of areas of quick and easy evolution that we're seeing at the moment, it's, high benefit, high reward kind of innovations tend to be footwork and boxing volume. Like footwork and boxing in general. That's where a lot of the, that's where it's not, it's very effective. I think it's less investment into more reward kind of improvements that we'll see. Because like I said, I still think there's a ton of space in MMA for improvements, but stuff like, why don't people leg kick more? Why don't people throw more teeps in MMA, more front kicks, more like all this kind of stuff? You're like, yeah, they could, and they probably should. But also, you got to ask yourself, why don't people in MMA have better basic footwork? Why don't they have head movement? Like, there's still so much missing that I think there's stuff which is basically easier, which will continue to or at least more immediately rewarding, which people will continue to kind of pick up and will illustrate the next sort of level of MMA talent, the Holloways and the people who will come after him that we see.
True. Yeah, I agree with all that. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for your question /Ned. Please stay healthy in prison. I hope you can, like duct tape some phone books or something to your front and back to protect yourself from any vicious stabbings that might occur. And that's about all we have time for, I think. So we'll have to get some more questions in the future. Fortunately, we'll probably have time next week because the next event is 2 weeks away. Not until December 29th will we be preparing ourselves to witness another highly anticipated rematch between John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. Likewise, the women's featherweight super fight between Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes, and some other good shit as well. So we'll probably talk about a few of those fights in advance next week and get to some more questions, maybe cover a topic as well besides. But until then, we thank you all very much for listening to this episode of Heavy Hands. Just before we close out, Phil, have you anything coming out this week?
I don't think so. Actually, I'm going to see if I can. I'm going to see if I can put my "Why Did the UFC Cut Sage Northcutt" article out, and I've also got a piece on John Jones I've had on the back burner for a while, and that'll probably be coming out, the following week as we move into UFC 232 kind of run up.
Hell yeah. All right. As for me, I'm not sure what's coming out this week, but I did put out a 2-part breakdown of Holloway versus Ortega. Part 1 came out last week on Friday. Part 1 just came out today, which is Monday, the 17th. So if you missed it by the time this episode comes out, give yourself a chance to go check it out. I think both parts are worth reading. It was a lot of fun to write, and it's a fight that I will still be...
Yeah, it was fantastic. I've read it, and I would fully recommend it.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's a fight that's easy to find things to break down in, because it was a scintillating performance from Max Holloway and a very gritty one from Brian Ortega. So easy to appreciate from multiple angles. Thank you all for listening. Find us on social media. You can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson on Twitter. You can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH. And you can find all of those pieces we mentioned on BloodyElbow.com. Subscribe to the show. Share it with your friends. Do a rating and review. Does that kind of thing still matter? Probably. Please do it. And support us on Patreon. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.